When I was only 8 years old, my parents walked out of my life without looking back. They didn't just leave the house. They abandoned me entirely, as if I was nothing more than a burden they could toss aside. I remember standing on the front porch with my small backpack waiting for them to return. They never did. The only person who stepped forward to catch me in that moment was my grandmother, Elizabeth Walker, or Grandma Lizzy, as everyone called her. She wrapped me in her arms, whispered that I was safe now, and from that day on, she became the only parent I truly knew. For 10 years, she gave me everything my parents refused to give: love, patience, encouragement, and the sense that I mattered in this world. Then, after all those years of silence, something unthinkable happened. On the very day of Grandma Lizzy's funeral, the people who had abandoned me came back. My mother, Linda, and my father, Thomas, stood at the church doors as if they belonged there, their faces cold and unreadable. They didn't come to mourn. They came to claim. Because Grandma Lizzy wasn't just a kind woman who raised me. She was also the quiet owner of an estate worth $80 million. As I watched them approach the casket, pretending to grieve, my stomach turned. They hadn't said my name in a decade, and now here they were, dressed in black, whispering to lawyers and sizing up the crowd like predators circling prey. I should have felt anger. Instead, I felt something colder: certainty. They thought they could walk back into my life and take what was hers, but they had no idea what Grandma Lizzy had left behind, or what she had prepared for them. Before everything fell apart, my world had been small but warm, a little 2-story house on the edge of Maplewood Lane, with ivy crawling up the porch and the scent of lemon pie drifting from the kitchen window. That was Grandma Lizzy's world, and when she took me in, she made it mine too. I remember the first night I stayed with her after my parents left. The sky had turned dark and heavy with rain, and my small suitcase sat beside the couch where I was supposed to sleep. I tried to be brave, but the moment thunder cracked across the sky, I couldn't hold back the tears. Grandma came quietly into the room, her gray hair tied back, her eyes kind and steady. She sat beside me, pulled the blanket up, and said softly, "You don't have to be brave all the time, sweetheart. You just have to be you. That's enough." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. Over the next few years, she taught me everything my parents never cared to. How to cook, how to fix things that were broken, how to listen more than I spoke. She owned a small antique shop downtown, Walker's Treasures, where every object had a story. A cracked teacup from 1890, a dusty pocket watch engraved with someone's initials. And she'd tell me, everything that's broken can still be beautiful if you care enough to fix it. That became our way of living. By the time I turned 16, the shop had become our second home. Customers adored her, her warmth, her humor, her endless patience. But beneath her gentle nature, Grandma was sharp. She had built her fortune quietly, through real estate, investments, and antiques that were worth far more than they appeared. She never bragged. She simply smiled and said, "Money's a tool, not a trophy." Sometimes people would ask about my parents. I'd just shake my head, and Grandma would change the subject. She never spoke ill of them, not once. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her staring out the window with a look that said everything words couldn't: regret, sadness, maybe even guilt for her own child's choices. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. We were sitting in the shop, polishing an old mirror, when Grandma suddenly dropped the cloth and pressed a hand to her chest. The mirror slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. I rushed to her side, terrified, as she whispered, "Just a little dizzy, dear." It wasn't just dizziness. Within a week, she was in the hospital. Heart complications, they said. She tried to smile through it, insisting she'd be home soon. But even as she said it, I could see the fear hiding behind her calm eyes. That was the first time in years that I prayed, not for money, not for revenge against my parents, but just for one more day with her. But time doesn't listen to prayers. In her final weeks, she made me promise to keep the shop running, to stay kind even when the world wasn't. One evening, she asked me to hand her a small wooden box from her bedside drawer. Inside was a letter sealed in red wax. If something "Happens to me," she said quietly. "This will explain everything. But not yet. Not until the right moment." I didn't understand what she meant then. But I would. Because that letter, and the secrets it held, would be the one thing standing between me and the parents who would soon come back to take everything she'd built. The weeks after Grandma Lizzy's passing felt like walking through fog, everything familiar but distant, like the world had lost its color. The house was too quiet, the ticking of her old grandfather clock too loud. I tried to keep myself busy, at the shop, dusting shelves, organizing antiques, pretending that at any moment she'd walk through the door with her bright red scarf and that soft, knowing smile. But reality doesn't rewind. The day after the funeral, I got a call from her lawyer, Mr. Benson, asking me to come to his office the following week for the reading of her will. He sounded calm, but his tone carried weight, as if he knew what was coming. I didn't. Not yet. That week crawled by. People came and went, offering condolences that felt hollow. She was such a wonderful woman, they'd say, and she was, but none of them knew what it felt like to lose her. Then came the knock on my door. When I opened it, my heart sank. Standing there, dressed in expensive black coats and fake sorrow, were my parents, Linda and Thomas Walker. The last time I'd seen them, I was a trembling 8-year-old begging them not to leave. Now, more than a decade later, they looked polished, cold, like strangers who just happened to share my last name. "Hello, sweetheart," my mother said, forcing a smile. "You've grown." I said nothing. My father cleared his throat and added, "We just wanted to pay our respects. Your grandmother was very dear to us." The lie hung in the air like poison. They didn't come to mourn. They came to collect. That much became clear when, later that day, I overheard them speaking outside near the car. 80 million, my father whispered, his voice low but sharp. She had properties, stocks, assets. "We can't let it all go to the kid." My mother's reply was cold and calculated. "She raised him, Thomas. That will complicate things. But if we play the sympathy angle, grieving parents, broken family, we might get the court to see reason." I felt sick. My hands shook as I gripped the doorframe, realizing exactly what kind of people they'd become. Not parents, not family, just vultures circling what they thought was theirs. Over the next few days, they made themselves comfortable in the house, uninvited, acting as though they belonged there. My mother walked around with a glass of wine, commenting on furniture. "This old place could use a renovation," she said casually. My father browsed through drawers, pretending to be helpful in sorting through Grandma's belongings. But I knew what they were really doing, searching for anything that could hint at her wealth. One evening, as I passed by Grandma's old bedroom, I caught my mother rifling through the wardrobe. When she saw me, she quickly smiled and said, "Oh, I was just looking for old photographs." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I simply said, "You'll hear everything at the reading." Her smile faltered for a moment, and in that moment, I knew Grandma had been right to tell me to wait. Whatever was in that sealed letter, whatever she had written before she died, it was meant for this. For them. And as much as it hurt to think of the battle ahead, I also felt something else flicker inside me for the first time in years. Not fear, strength. Because I had one final promise to keep, and I wasn't about to let the people who abandoned me take the only person who ever truly loved me. The day of the will reading arrived like the calm before a storm. Mr. Benson's office sat in an old brick building downtown, filled with the faint smell of paper and cedar polish. I arrived early, dressed in the suit Grandma Lizzy had given me for my high school graduation. I hadn't worn it since, but it felt right, like carrying a part of her strength with me. Minutes later, the door opened, and in came my parents. Linda wore a veil and fake pearls, clutching a tissue she didn't need. Thomas strutted in behind her, his gold watch gleaming under the light. They both greeted me as if we were a happy family reunited by grief instead of greed. Mr. Benson stood up, his calm professionalism never wavering. "Please, take a seat," he said. "This will be brief, but important." He placed a large brown envelope on the mahogany table and opened it carefully. Inside were several pages, handwritten in the steady, looping script I knew so well. Grandma's handwriting. He began reading aloud. To my beloved grandson, Daniel Walker, who became the light in the darkest chapter of my life. When his parents left, I promised him he would never be alone again. And now, as I leave this world, I make him the sole guardian of everything I built. The house, the businesses, the accounts, and the estate valued at approximately $80 million. The room went dead silent. My parents froze. My mother's fake tears stopped instantly. My father leaned forward, his jaw tightening. Mr. Benson continued. To my son Thomas and his wife Linda, who chose ambition over family, I leave my forgiveness. Nothing more. That single sentence hit harder than any inheritance ever could. My mother gasped. This has to be a mistake, she said sharply, her composure slipping. Surely she meant to include us. We're her children! Mr. Benson calmly shook his head. Mrs. Walker's instructions were very clear. She reviewed this will with me personally 3 months before her passing. Thomas slammed his palm against the table. You can't do this! She wasn't of sound mind. Daniel must have manipulated her. His words burned, but I held my ground. You left me, I said quietly. She didn't forget that. Neither did I, my mother's face twisted in anger. We did what we had to. You were a difficult child. No, I cut in, voice trembling but firm. I was a child who wanted his parents to love him. And you left. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the rustle of the paper as Mr. Benson folded the will back into its envelope. Then, as if on cue, my father straightened his jacket and said through gritted teeth, We'll contest this. She was old, confused. A judge will see reason. Mr. Benson sighed. You're free to try, of course. But I should mention, Mrs. Walker also left behind video documentation. He pressed a button on the remote, and the flat-screen TV on the wall flickered to life. There she was, Grandma Lizzy, her silver hair perfectly brushed, her smile soft but sharp as ever. Thomas. Linda, she began, looking directly into the camera. If you're watching this, I imagine you're angry. But understand this, love is not a contract. It's something earned, and you forfeited it when you left Daniel. I built my fortune with integrity. I'll not see it fall into the hands of those who lack it. Her eyes softened. Daniel, my dear boy, live with kindness, but never again let anyone make you feel small. The video ended, leaving only silence. My mother's face went pale. My father's fists clenched, but he said nothing. They both stood up abruptly and left without another word, their footsteps echoing down the hall, and as the door closed, I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. For the first time since I was 8, I wasn't the boy they abandoned. I was the man Grandma Lizzy raised. That night, after the will reading, I drove back to Grandma Lizzy's house, the home she had filled with warmth and life for so many years. The silence was heavy now, but it wasn't empty. It was sacred, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to decide what came next. The fireplace still smelled faintly of her lavender oil, and the photos of us lined the mantel, birthdays, Christmas mornings, late-night card games when we'd laugh until we cried. She was gone, but her presence lingered everywhere, like sunlight that refused to fade. I stood there for a long time, replaying her final words from the video. Live with kindness, but never again let anyone make you feel small. I wanted to believe that peace had settled everything, that my parents' greed would fade as quickly as they had from my life years ago. But deep down, I knew better. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Mr. Benson. Daniel, he said, his voice tight. I thought you should know. Your parents have filed a petition. They're contesting the will. My chest tightened. On what grounds? Same as most. Claiming your grandmother was manipulated and unfit to make clear decisions before her passing. Of course, they couldn't accept defeat gracefully. They'd rather drag her name and mine through the mud. I drove straight to his office. What happens now? I asked. Mr. Benson looked up from the paperwork. They'll try to prove their claim in court. But she was careful, Daniel. Every document is airtight. She even left recorded interviews from when she updated her will. She anticipated this. That sounded exactly like her. Always 2 steps ahead. But knowing Grandma had prepared didn't stop the dread from creeping in. My parents were relentless. They knew how to twist stories, how to play the victim. And this time, they were coming after the last piece of her I had left, the life she built for us. A few weeks later, the case hit the local news. Reporters called it the Walker family estate feud. Cameras flashed whenever I left the house. Some painted me as the devoted grandson protecting his grandmother's legacy. Others hinted I'd manipulated her for the money. It was humiliating. I started getting hate mail from people who'd never met me. Even old friends kept their distance, not wanting to get caught up in the drama. The isolation felt familiar, like being that 8-year-old boy again, waiting on the porch for someone to come back. Except this time, I wasn't waiting. I was fighting. Mr. Benson helped me gather everything. Grandma's letters, her medical records, the videos she recorded. She'd been sharp until the end, sharp enough to anticipate every one of my parents' lies. Then one evening, while reviewing old files, I found something I hadn't seen before. It was an envelope with my name written in her delicate cursive, tucked at the back of her desk. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before she passed. My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, I know your parents have returned. They'll fight for what they believe they deserve. But remember, they can't steal what isn't theirs. Don't let their bitterness turn you cruel. Let truth and patience do the fighting for you. I've left one more surprise for them, and for you, in the place where it all began. The place where it all began. I knew instantly where she meant. The old family cabin. The same one my parents left me at when I was 8 years old. Whatever Grandma left there, it wasn't just about money. It was about closure, and maybe, just maybe, it would be the final piece of the story that could set everything right. The next morning, I packed a small bag and drove out to the old family cabin, tucked deep in the Colorado woods. The drive was long and winding, the kind of route Grandma Lizzy used to take when she wanted to clear her mind and fill her heart, as she used to say. I hadn't been there since that terrible night when I was 8. The night my parents left me standing alone on the porch, watching their taillights vanish into the dark. The cabin hadn't changed much. The wood was weathered, the steps creaked, and the windows still reflected the trees like glassy eyes. But as I stepped inside, I felt something shift. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling of walking into a memory that had been frozen in time, waiting for me to come back. Dust hung in the air, dancing in the sunlight that filtered through the curtains. Everything was still there. Grandma's rocking chair, the hand-woven rug, the shelf filled with her old books. And on the kitchen table, sitting neatly in the center, was a small wooden box with my initials carved into it. DWI ran my fingers over the grooves, my throat tightening. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk handkerchief, was a stack of letters and a flash drive. The first letter was addressed to me. My dear boy, if you've found this, it means your parents have returned, and the truth must now be known. For years, I stayed silent not to protect them, but to protect you. There are things they never wanted you to remember, but it's time you did. I felt my pulse quicken as I unfolded the rest. Inside were copies of legal documents, court records, and adoption papers. My name was there, Daniel Walker, but under biological parents, it listed 2 names I'd never seen before. My heart pounded. I quickly plugged the flash drive into my laptop. A video opened. Grandma Lizzy sitting in her favorite chair, her expression calm but firm. Daniel, she said softly, you deserve to know the truth. Thomas and Linda weren't just neglectful. They weren't your real parents. They adopted you when you were 2 years old, after your biological parents died in a car accident. They promised to care for you. But as their debts grew and their greed took over, they saw you as a burden, not a blessing. That's why they left you here. When I found out what they did, I brought you home and never looked back. I sat there frozen, the air leaving my lungs. Everything I'd believed, all the pain, all the anger, it wasn't the whole story. They hadn't abandoned their son. They'd abandoned someone else's. And yet Grandma Lizzy, she became my real family, by choice, by love. The camera flickered as she continued. They'll never admit what they did, Daniel. But now you have proof. And if they try to fight for what's mine, what's yours, this truth will end it. You don't owe them anything but the peace of walking away. I wiped my eyes. I didn't know whether to feel anger, grief, or relief. Maybe all 3. But one thing was certain. I finally understood why she'd left this behind. That night, I burned a fire in the old fireplace and sat with her letter in my hands. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, just like it had the night she found me. For the first time, the cabin didn't feel like the place where I was left behind. It felt like the place where I began. Grandma Lizzy hadn't just given me her fortune. She'd given me my truth. 2 weeks later, the courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Reporters hovered outside like vultures, their cameras flashing through the frosted glass as I stepped inside. The air smelled of paper, perfume, and anticipation, the scent of war disguised in civility. My parents sat at the opposing table. Linda wore black again, her expression the same rehearsed sorrow she'd worn at Grandma's funeral. Thomas sat stiffly beside her, whispering to their attorney, a sharp-eyed man who looked like he thrived on family feuds. Mr. Benson leaned toward me. Stay calm, he murmured. Remember what she taught you. Truth doesn't need to shout. The judge entered, and we rose. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From resolve. The case began with my parents' lawyer declaring that Grandma Lizzy had been emotionally manipulated by me, that her mental decline made her unfit to sign a will of such scale. Every word was a dagger, and they twisted it with feigned heartbreak. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue. "Your Honor," she said in a trembling voice, "I only want what's fair. My mother was sick. Daniel convinced her to disinherit us. He took advantage of her love." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to interrupt. I had my moment coming. When it did, Mr. Benson rose slowly and placed a single USB drive on the table. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a video message from Mrs. Elizabeth Walker, recorded 3 months before her passing, when she was in full control of her faculties. It addresses her estate, her son, and her grandson directly." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom lights dimmed as the video flickered to life on the projector. There she was again, Grandma Lizzy, sitting in her floral chair, sunlight behind her, her voice calm and steady. To my son and his wife, "If you are contesting my will, let me remind you that I have always known the difference between love and greed. Daniel has never once asked for a cent from me. You, on the other hand, have taken without giving since the day you could walk." The courtroom was silent. My parents' lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "You left Daniel," Grandma continued, "not because of him, but because of your own failure. You saw him as a burden, when he was the greatest blessing our family ever received. And if you now seek to profit from the family you threw away, know this: the truth will not be kind to you." Then, her voice softened. "Daniel, if you're here, remember, love cannot be bought or stolen. You are my family, always." The video ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. The judge turned to my parents. "You claim she was unfit, yet this woman seems entirely lucid and remarkably clear in her intentions. Do you still wish to proceed?" Thomas stood, his face red. "This is absurd!" "She was manipulated. There's no proof." Mr. Benson raised a folder. "Actually, Your Honor, there is." He opened it to reveal the adoption documents, the ones from the cabin. Gasps rippled through the room. "These papers," Mr. Benson said, "show that Daniel Walker was legally adopted by the defendants, Thomas and Linda Walker, at the age of 2. They later abandoned him. Mrs. Walker took custody and raised him as her own. She had every legal and moral right to leave her estate to him, her chosen heir." Linda's face drained of color. "This is a lie," she cried, but the judge had already seen enough. He turned his gaze to them, his tone sharp but controlled. "It appears Mrs. Walker's final wishes were entirely deliberate. Unless you have further evidence, this case is dismissed." The gavel struck once, final, powerful. My parents sat frozen, their lawyer speechless. And just like that, the empire they tried to steal crumbled before them. Not from anger, but from truth. As I stood to leave, I didn't look back, because I realized something Grandma had always known. Justice isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and undeniable. When I walked out of the courthouse, the cold air hit my face like a wave of freedom. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and microphones crowded toward me. "Daniel, how does it feel to win? Do you have a message for your parents? What will you do with the $80 million? I didn't answer any of them. I just kept walking, because this wasn't victory. Not really. It was closure, and closure doesn't need applause. Mr. Benson caught up beside me, smiling gently. "She'd be proud, you know," he said. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. We shook hands, and then I left, driving straight to the one place that had always made sense, Grandma's house. When I stepped inside, sunlight poured through the windows like it had been waiting for me. The house didn't feel haunted by grief anymore. It felt alive again, like it was exhaling after holding its breath for months. I sat in her rocking chair, the same one she used to knit in, and let the quiet sink in. My reflection in the window caught my eye, not the scared little boy I used to be, but the man she'd raised me to become. But then came the sound I wasn't expecting, a knock on the door. I hesitated. Part of me hoped it was over, that the past had finally stopped knocking. But when I opened it, I saw my mother standing there, alone. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup smeared. She looked nothing like the woman who'd stood so proudly in court. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Please. Just let me talk." I stepped aside. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She sat at the edge of the couch, fidgeting with her hands. "I didn't know about the adoption," she began. "Thomas handled it. I cut her off. You left me, Mom. You both did. Whatever the reason, you made that choice. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know, and I can't change that. But after the judge read those papers, after seeing her video, I realized what I did, what I became. She looked around the room, her gaze softening as it landed on a photo of Grandma Lizzy holding me as a boy. She loved you so much. She did, I said simply. I was jealous of that, she admitted, her voice cracking. She gave you what I couldn't, or wouldn't. And when I saw how happy you were, I convinced myself it meant you didn't need me. That's how I justified walking away. For the first time, her words didn't sound rehearsed. They sounded real. I don't expect forgiveness, she said finally. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. Everything she saw in you, I see it too. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Years of pain don't just vanish because someone regrets causing it. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger. Just pity. I hope you find peace, I said quietly. But that doesn't mean you get to walk back into my life. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. I understand. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door and whispered, She raised you right, Daniel. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. That night, I lit a candle by Grandma's photo, the same way she used to light one for my birthday every year. I whispered, It's over, Grandma. And for the first time, I meant it. She hadn't just protected her fortune. She'd protected my heart. And somehow, even after death, she'd guided me to forgiveness. The kind that doesn't excuse the past, but frees you from it. Weeks passed after the courtroom storm finally calmed. The headlines faded, the reporters moved on, and my parents disappeared from the city. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, silence didn't scare me. It soothed me. I spent my mornings walking through Grandma Lizzy's garden, her pride and joy. The roses she planted decades ago were still alive, some even blooming out of season, as if they refused to die. I often caught myself talking to her while pruning the stems or watering the soil, telling her about my day like I used to. Maybe it was silly, but somehow, I felt she was still listening. Then, one afternoon, as I went through her old study to organize papers for donation, I found a folder labeled simply for Daniel, after everything. Inside was another handwritten note. My dear boy, if you're reading this, then the storm has passed. I always knew you'd weather it, but I didn't raise you to live behind locked gates of money or memory. The world is still out there, waiting for your kindness. Do something good with what I've left you. Turn our story into something that helps others find hope when they've been forgotten. Under the letter were plans, blueprints, and donation proposals for a youth home. She'd drawn it herself, every room labeled with care. Bedrooms, a library, an art space, even a small workshop. At the top, she'd written the name, The Second Chance Home. My eyes burned with tears. She'd wanted to build a safe place for kids like me, the ones who'd been left behind, who needed someone to remind them that love doesn't always come from blood. And right then, I knew what I had to do. Over the next 6 months, I poured myself into making her dream a reality. The estate's funds became the foundation for the home. I sold off parts of her unused land, partnered with local charities, and brought in volunteers who shared her vision. Every brick we laid felt like setting one more piece of her spirit into the world. When the Second Chance Home opened, dozens of children came through its doors. Some were foster kids. Some were runaways. Some were simply lost in life. But every one of them reminded me of that 8-year-old boy who'd stood on a porch once, waiting for love that never came, until it did. The opening ceremony drew local attention, but I didn't invite cameras. This wasn't about publicity or legacy. It was about keeping a promise. As I stood under the archway, a young girl with wide brown eyes tugged on my sleeve. Mr. Daniel, she asked shyly, is it true you built this place because someone took care of you when nobody else would? I smiled. That's true, I said. And now it's my turn to take care of someone else. She grinned and ran off toward the garden, the one I'd filled with roses from Grandma's backyard. Watching her laugh under the sunlight, I felt something inside me settle, like a wound finally healing shut. That night, I sat on the porch of the home, looking at the stars. I pulled out Grandma's old locket, the one she used to wear every day, and whispered, We did it, Grandma. You didn't just save me. You saved every kid who'll walk through these doors. A cool breeze swept through the trees, and for just a moment, I swore I could hear her soft laugh carried in the wind. She'd always said that love was the only thing that multiplied when you gave it away, and now, finally, I understood. It's been 2 years since the courtroom battle, and life has found a quiet rhythm again. The Second Chance Home has become more than just a building, it's a heartbeat. Every laugh in those hallways, every child who finds comfort in a warm meal or a soft bed, feels like a small echo of Grandma Lizzy's love. I still live in her old house, though it's less of a monument to grief now, and more of a place filled with beginnings. Her portrait still hangs above the fireplace, not as a reminder of loss, but of guidance. Whenever I pass it, I swear her eyes still follow me with that familiar mix of pride and mischief. Sometimes, I get letters from my mother. Simple ones. Apologies, updates, attempts at peace. I read them all, though I rarely reply. Forgiveness isn't a door I've closed. It's just one I'm not ready to open fully. Not yet. One evening, as I walked through the home's garden, a small boy ran up to me holding a wilted rose. "It broke," he said sadly, holding it out like a confession. I knelt down smiling. "Then we'll plant it again," I told him. "That's how things grow back stronger." As we pressed the rose into the soil, I realized that was Grandma's final lesson. That broken things don't stay broken forever. With care, they heal, rebuild, and bloom again. When the boy ran off, I stood there for a moment, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the garden, and for the first time, I felt no shadows behind me, just peace. Grandma Lizzy's love hadn't ended with her death. It had only changed hands. Now it was mine to carry forward.